doings. Pete, you want to give
sure.
us the overview?
So this is the Route 2 Lancaster Road sidewalk, otherwise called the Pedestrian Improvement Project, federally funded through the state of New Hampshire. We've had hearings. We had our first hearing last fall. Eric Grenier from HEB Engineers is our lead engineer on this. We have gotten to the point where the base engineering is done, and we've done the surveys. You might have seen the survey folks out there, and we've had to go through a lot of different options. Part of the process of this is, has the town considered different alternatives, different options, right? Let's explore, you know more about the site, and maybe more importantly, what is the input from the residents? Who's going to be impacted? Get input. Our first session, we got some really good input, and we put all that together. And we also, of course, have to look at fiscal constraints, because wouldn't it be great to have an underground heated sidewalk with, you know, free balloons all the way, you know, up the hill? We can't afford that. So this particular project, which started, what, 2 years ago, almost 3?
I think, yeah, about 2 years ago.
Yeah. So we had we have a budget, and that's what we got for a grant. We were fortunate. And so now we take all your input from the past, what we see in the field, and today is presenting what we are going to try to go to for a preferred plan. But again, we want to let you know, here's what we've come up with our preferred alternative, and an opportunity for you to comment, question, and then the next step's actually going to be starting the project. So without any further ado, I'll let Eric step in and start the show.
Thank you for the introduction. As Peter mentioned, my name is Eric Grenier, and from HEB Engineers. Joining me tonight is Aaron Lamar. He's going to help me take notes and write down all the feedback that we have tonight. But as Peter mentioned, this is the second informational meeting for this project. We did have the first meeting back in August of last year, where we covered the general scope of the project. And it was more of a listening session to get some of the feedback from what you folks have, for concerns and things they'd like to see, in the corridor for the project. So as Peter mentioned, this is a federally funded project. We have DOT and a federal highway project number you can see there on the screen. But as we go through tonight, there are going to be some terms that I might abbreviate. But here's sort of just a frequently used acronym slide to just help you guys understand, some of the abbreviations that are used throughout the presentation tonight. FHWA, that's the Federal Highway Administration. They are the ones who have given the money to the state and then down to the town, but they are the oversight for the project. So the federal money is coming from Federal Highway. NHDOT, that is the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. They are the administrator for the project. This project has a DOT project manager who we are working with back and forth to make sure that we are dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's as a federal funding recipient. TAP, Transportation Alternatives Program, that is the DOT program where the money is coming through. Transportation Alternatives Program is a non-motorized use program where these funds are coming from. And LPA is Local Public Agency. I may refer to that a few times tonight, but that is the process that we have to follow from design through construction. There are a slew of requirements that, because the money is coming from the federal government, they have a set of rules and guidelines that we have to follow to make sure that we're doing things appropriately. Just some background on the project. As I mentioned, the project is administered through the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. It is an 80% cost share from Federal Highway and a 20% local match. So the way that works out is, you know, if you have $100,000, $80,000 of that is federal highway, $20,000 is local match. So all the funding for this project is currently an 80-20% cost share. Just a little brief overview why we're here tonight. So tonight we're gonna get sort of the second project overview and get your feedback on the alternatives that we're presenting tonight. We're also here, as it is a federal requirement that we have several public informational sessions along the way. As I mentioned, this is the second meeting in the process. And the first public session, as I mentioned, was done in August of 24, and this is sort of the next meeting that's required in the federally regulated process. So for those who may not have been at the first session, this is a general overview of the project area. The general project limits go from the Route 16 intersection by the railroad tracks, and they go westerly, generally to the Brayburn Village housing development. The project area generally is constrained to US Route 2. But that's a brief overview of the overall project area that we've been looking at as part of this project. A little background on the first public input session. So as I mentioned, it was held in August of 2024. It was very well attended. I think there was 25 or 30 members from the public who came out to give some input on that. That's, you know, pretty good turnout for these things. Some of the key takeaways that we got from that meeting, the Gorham recreational trail crossing. There are various safety concerns with that crossing from the parking lot where the Gorham Rec Trail is on the opposite side of US Route 2. So a lot of the feedback that we got was related to that crossing. The existing sidewalk stops at High Street, and there's generally no pedestrian connection along Route 2 from the High Street and up to the Gorham Rec Trail. Brayburn Village is a consideration as a connection to the project. Currently, there's no connection from Brayburn Village easterly towards Route 16 or the Rec Trail. Deteriorating sidewalk conditions, that came up a few times. You know, the sidewalks are in need of repair. Sidewalk width was a discussion. We talked about, you know, various width of the sidewalk. Right now it's 54 inches wide, more or less. So it is narrow in some spots. And obviously maintenance, the town is required, you know, to maintain and responsible for maintaining those sidewalks. So we want to make sure that what we're proposing, that the town takes over, that it's maintainable and durable moving forward. So as part of the federal process, we have to speak a lot about why we're doing what we're doing. So there's a purpose and a need for each project. And when we present the project purpose, it is something for us to use as a tool to evaluate the need for the project. And, you know, Federal Highway will look at the purpose of the project, and they will make sure that they're putting the funds to a project that has a good purpose and need. So the project purpose that we have identified for the project is correct the deficiencies in the pedestrian facilities. Or sidewalk condition, we talked about that. Sidewalk width, pedestrian safety and connectivity. We have the Gorham Rec Trail crossing. You know, safety has been a concern there. The lack of connectivity to that facility as a sidewalk connection from High Street West. And then, you know, improving the maintenance and durability of the project forward. We obviously want this facility to last. So we want to incorporate materials that are gonna last and survive in the environment that we put them in. Background of existing conditions. Some of these, if you were here last time, these are going to be some similar slides that we showed as part of the public input session in August. So we have the Route 2, Route 16 intersection that we have part of our corridor here that was an important consideration as we look at design and where we're going to start and stop the project and what we're looking for alternatives. Obviously, we talked about it, the existing sidewalk conditions. You can see here in various locations they're deteriorating and need to be replaced. Here's an image west of High Street. As you can see, there are no pedestrian facilities west of High Street. So if you're walking along the sidewalk and you want to get to, the rec trail or further points west, along Route 2, there's really no facilities for you as pedestrians to get to where you want to go. Some conditions and things to consider along the corridor. There are retaining walls, there's fences, roadway shoulder width. Currently, there's a wide paved shoulder that parallels the sidewalk along Route 2. There was discussion about, we don't want to narrow the shoulder. Bicycle accommodations are important when you look at the paved shoulder width. We want to make sure that there's sufficient shoulder width for that separation from the traffic. Maintenance, I talked about that, but consideration for the town is going to be taking over the maintenance of the project. Pedestrian safety, we have various town street crossings. We have driveways that we have to cross. There's no curb reveal really along the length of the sidewalk. The sidewalk is at the grade of the road. So that in and of itself, when you walk there, it feels like there's a lack of protection, a lack of safety when you're walking in that facility. And then accessibility. We have to make sure that whatever facilities we implement are ADA accessible, so everybody can use these facilities moving forward. Utilities. There are various utilities along the project's length. There's drainage. There's water and sewer, there's utility poles. So whatever we do for layout, we want to make sure that, we incorporate all of these things into the design moving forward. Drainage, there's areas where there's no curbing now. Once we put curbing there's going to be a barrier to that drainage. What are we going to do with that water? That's an important consideration is, what's going to happen with that water once we put a curb there? We can't flood people's front yards. So we're going to have to look at, where's the water going? How do we capture it and where do we put it? Water and sewer, most of the sewer traverses our project. I think a significant portion of the existing sewer line is below the existing sidewalk. So we have to look at, what impacts is this project going to have on the existing water and sewer for the project. And as you can see, there's utility poles along the project corridor. So moving the sidewalk, if we wanted to shift the sidewalk in 8 feet, well, we have, a varying number of utility poles that we have to deal with that relocation is not easy in some of these things. Brayburn Village connection, we touched on it. Here's the western connection for Brayburn Village to the project. Currently, there's no pedestrian facilities that get the Brayburn Village residents to the project, or at least to the Gorham Rec Trail. There's no connection to that facility. The US 2 crossing, that was, like I said, a big discussion in the first public input session, but big project consideration here. How are we going to get people from the parking lot safely across the road? There's really, there's no designated crosswalk there now. Most people are using that location as the means to cross the highway. So what are we going to do there to make that crossing official, visible, safe, sort of moving forward? There's an existing railroad and a railroad right-of-way in our project limits. Through the federal process, anytime you're outside of a local or state right-of-way, there are right-of-way considerations that we have to take into account when we're laying out the project and where the project limits are going to start and stop. So the railroad and coordination with the railroad and where the project is gonna start and stop was important, in our preferred alternative approach. So getting into some of the alternatives, that we looked at, I'll just touch on the Gorham Recreational Trail Crossing first, because this alternative is really what we're looking at, as the sole alternative for the pedestrian crossing. We do have other layout alternatives for the sidewalk, but this is sort of what we're proposing at a high level here for the Gorham Rec Trail crossing. As I mentioned, currently it's not a formal crossing. I think people, they get from one side of the road to the other side of the road. There's no official crosswalk. There is signage, but currently there's nothing really there to designate that this is, a place where people cross. Whenever federal funds are spent on a crosswalk, you have to meet the federal highway requirement for crosswalk lighting. That requires some lighting on both sides of the crosswalk. So lighting is going to be considered here for the pedestrian crossing moving forward. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons. I don't have a great picture of it here, but those are the push buttons with the sign and then the two lights flash next to the yellow sign. Considering a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, doing the analysis through the design documents, that's the recommended treatment based on the location and the use for the highway. So rapid rectangular flashing beacons are a consideration at this location. Pavement markings. Currently, there's no pavement markings there as I mentioned, to tell you that there's a crosswalk there. So getting that crosswalk formalized with pavement markings is considered for this project, and additional signage. There is signage in both directions. I think there's one sign just kind of telling you that there's a crosswalk 250 feet in each direction, but additional advanced warnings will help motorists understand that there's a crosswalk coming, and then hopefully by the time we get to this location, the rapid rectangular flashing beacons will be there, and the crossing will be more visualized. We did look at an alternate location for the crossing. It was further east of where the crossing is now. We didn't present it tonight because it's not really a preferred location for sight distance, but we looked at relocating that crosswalk further east. But once we went through sort of the process of evaluating that crosswalk, we felt that keeping it where it is direct to the trail, makes the most sense for that location. But if there's any questions, feel free to stop me, because we're going to jump right into the next alternative. But that's what we're going to be proposing as an alternative for formalizing that pedestrian crossing. All right, alternative, I call it 1A. There's a 1A and a 1B. They're very similar. The only difference really is the sidewalk width. So 1A, we looked at 4-foot wide sidewalk. And when I say 4-foot wide sidewalk, it's 4 feet of sidewalk plus the 6-inch curb. So really it would be a 4.5-foot wide space, but the federal required minimum is a 4-foot wide walking space with a 6-inch curb. That's what's out there now for the most part. It's 54 inches. In some spots it's a little bit wider, but for the most part out there right now is the recommended, or the absolute minimum that would be recommended for a pedestrian facility in this area. When federal funds are spent on a sidewalk, we have to make sure that that sidewalk meets all of the federal requirements. And with a 4-foot wide sidewalk, we would have to provide what are considered like passing spaces or bump outs every 200 feet, where it bumps the sidewalk out to a 5-foot wide sidewalk. So every 200 feet, you would have a section of sidewalk that would bump out to allow passing for ADA accommodations. As I mentioned, that 4 foot wide sidewalk is a federal, minimum design requirement. Looking at US Route 2, we're looking to maintain that 4 foot wide paved shoulder. For the most part, the existing shoulder varies between 4 feet wide, 5 feet wide, but to accommodate cycling, I think 4 foot wide is the minimum requirement there. So we would look at trying to set the new curb line to maintain that 4 foot wide paved shoulder to accommodate cycling. With these, all the alternatives, there's no major improvements to Route 2. Really what we're looking to do is work from the white line in, like from the white line towards people's properties. Nothing is really taking place in the roadway. So what it would be is basically a trench along the white line, you know, a new pavement, new curb, and then we would work sort of away from people. So there's really no major improvements to the roadway itself. As I mentioned, you know, this option considers the pedestrian crossing alternative that we previously discussed. With alternatives 1A and 1B, we would propose to reconstruct the existing sidewalks from Route 16 to High Street and provide a new sidewalk from High Street to the Gorham Rec Trail. So there would be that pedestrian crossing from High Street to the Rec Trail, and then provide a connection to Brayburn Village. So it's an extra couple hundred feet of sidewalk to get from Brayburn Village to the Gorham Rec Trail. So that would be sort of the western end of the project. So the eastern end of the project, we evaluated, you know, same cross section, 4 foot wide sidewalk to Route 16. And then we looked at all the alternatives, you know, what would it look like to have a new sidewalk from the railroad tracks by the Gorham House of Pizza to Cross Street. The challenge with that is budget, and there are a lot of utility conflicts in that location. Utility poles, there's water infrastructure, there's hydrants. So that area really presented a challenge. There would need to be some easements required with getting that sidewalk in place. So that was something that we did evaluate with all the alternatives. But for alternative 1A, it's mostly reconstruction of existing sidewalks at a 4 foot wide width. Alternative 1B is very similar to 1A. Basically the same project with a 5 foot wide sidewalk. The 5 foot wide sidewalk with a 6-inch granite curb is the recommended minimum. It's not the absolute minimum, but it's the recommended minimum for a sidewalk pedestrian facility. So 1B is, like I said, it's the same thing as 1A, but it's a 5 foot wide sidewalk within those project limits. Same with the east end of the project. We did have some challenges just west of the railroad tracks. There's some existing retaining walls. So I think we would have to look at a section of sidewalk that would be limited to 4 foot wide in that section. We do have some challenges with space, retaining walls, grading in that section, but for the most part, 5 foot wide everywhere else. And we looked at, as I mentioned, a sidewalk across street to the railroad tracks. Alternative 2, we looked at a 5 foot wide sidewalk on the north side of US Route 2. That would be pretty much construction of an entirely new sidewalk from the north side, from the west side of the Gorham Rec Trail, along Route 2, down to the railroad tracks by the Gorham House of Pizza. Challenges with that, and we'll get into it a little bit when we have our alternative analysis evaluation. But the challenge with that is we're not really meeting the purpose and need because we still have a deficient pedestrian facility on the opposite side of the road. So if we don't touch this facility, we would probably have to remove it as part of this project if we put a sidewalk on the opposite side of the road. So not addressing the deficient pedestrian facility on the opposite side of Route 2 is an issue for this. Similar with the other alternatives, a 5-foot wide sidewalk with a granite curb. There are some utility impacts on this side. I think the town's water line is on this side of the road. There are hydrants on this side of the road. So there are some significant challenges with constructing a sidewalk on the north side of Route 2. But in general, the project limits were the same. From Brayburn Village to the Gorham Rec Trail, and then east down to Route 16. Similarly here, we would propose to construct a 5-foot wide sidewalk down through this project corridor, and then some improvements on the east side of the railroad tracks. Pretty similar to the other alternatives on the east side of the tracks. So alternative 3 was the alternative that met the purpose and need and looked at sort of the budget. And we'll get into the budget a little bit here. But we're looking at priority area as to what are the most efficient pedestrian facilities and still meet the goals of the project from point A to point B. So alternative 3, what we're considering sort of the priority area, is Brayburn Village on the existing sidewalk side of Route 2. So constructing a new 5-foot wide sidewalk from Brayburn Village to High Street, reconstruction of existing sidewalks from High Street pretty much down to the railroad tracks, and then no improvements on the east side of the railroad tracks. It's worth noting that the existing sidewalks on the east side of the railroad tracks are a little bit better condition than the sidewalks west of the railroad tracks. But in terms of what we're considering priority area, the most efficient pedestrian facilities, this alternative would meet sort of that goal of the project. Alternative analysis. So here we have sort of a table that has the various alternatives and some of the considerations for each alternative. Here we have on the first line total cost. So we have total project costs for each alternative. Alternative 3 being the one we just had, the priority area, that's sort of the limited scope of project. So that has the lowest or the least total cost. All the alternative costs include the rec trail crossing that was discussed as a major major item that needs improvement. All of the alternatives provide a connection to Brayburn Village. The Route 16 connection, which would be the east side of the tracks, alternative 3 does not address those sidewalks on the east side of the tracks. Correcting pedestrian deficiencies. So alternative 2 being the sidewalk that was on the opposite side of Route 2 does not address that that purpose, because we still have an existing facility that's deficient that people will use. So if we went with alternative 2, we wouldn't be looking at addressing and correcting those pedestrian deficiencies. Environmental impacts, for the most part, all the alternatives have similar environmental impacts. There's no wetlands. The permitting is very similar for each alternative for that, for that category. Utility impacts, for the most part, alternative 1 and 3 being on the south side of US Route 2, minor utility impacts. Alternative 2, we do have, as I mentioned, utility pole conflicts, the water, the existing water line, hydrants. So alternative 2 has more impacts to the existing utilities throughout the project corridor than the other alternatives, and right-of-way impacts. Alternatives 1 and 2 have what we're considering significant right-of-way impacts because they do encroach into the railroad right-of-way, which would require significant coordination with the folks at the Railroad Bureau. So the alternative 3, stopping outside of the railroad corridor, we don't have those right-of-way impacts that we would have to deal with. So for tonight, we're presenting sort of the proposed action and what we're looking to move forward with throughout the rest of the project. This is still very preliminary. We're still engineering study level, but alternative 3, thinking about the budget and the impacts and addressing the purpose and needs. Alternative 3 is sort of what is being proposed as the proposed action moving forward. So it's a little tough to see, but this represents sort of a typical section of the roadway if you were traveling along Route 2. So the sidewalk, the yellow here represents sort of new pavement. Just outside where the new sidewalk would be, there'd be a saw cut and a trench. So we would have new curbing with, a 3 or 4 foot wide trench patch along the face of the curbing, new 5 foot wide sidewalks, and then whatever grading or grass is necessary to restabilize whatever gets disturbed, during construction. This sort of represents the typical section throughout the corridor. Granite curb with a 5 foot wide sidewalk. So now that we have sort of the alternative proposed action identified, we have a set of plans here if you guys want to look at them after. I don't have all of the plans on the slides, but sort of a couple of detailed slides that show some of the important characteristics of the alternative. So here's sort of the western end of the project as you come towards Brayburn Village. So generally the project is going to stop, or we're proposing the project to stop near Unit 20. So as you're moving west, it would be that first building in Brayburn Village on the west side. That sort of represents the westerly project limits. Pedestrian crossing, this is sort of a blow-up sketch of that area. We would be looking to formalize the crossing with lighting and rectangular rapid flashing beacons, having the appropriate ADA accessibility accommodations, which are the detectable warning plates that you see when you come to a crosswalk. So the plates will be there, as I mentioned, lighting, and then sort of a formalized pavement marking identifying that the crossing is there. When you do look at the plans, we do have some red lines on there that identify grading easements or anticipated easements that we may need throughout the project. So when you get there, we can't really discuss the easements tonight because we don't have full design, but once we get to preliminary design phases, we're allowed to start looking and talking about whether we need a little bit of space to do some grading, so the drainage works. But there are just some brief areas where we might need some easements to make sure that happens. Proposed action, here's High Street. So we are proposing the sidewalk extension westerly of High Street. So that sort of identifies that area there. And then as you move easterly, generally the sidewalk is more or less in the same spot it is now. There will be slight adjustments here and there to make sure that that curbing is has a nice alignment centered with the road, and we have a consistent shoulder width, and it works with the existing drainage. But this slide generally represents the sidewalk extension going westerly to High Street. This slide sort of just represents more of a typical section through the project area. We have essentially the existing sidewalk, or excuse me, the proposed sidewalk in purple. It's hard to see, but it's generally along the alignment of the existing sidewalk. There is some space to do some grading. There's some width there to look at widening that sidewalk to the 5 foot wide recommended minimum width there. But we do have, like I said, more plans that show the entire project limits, but these are just some typical areas here. We got Center Lane and Cross Street on the other side of the road. And then this slide represents sort of the easterly project limit as you start approaching the Route 16 intersection. So we are generally looking to stop the project at Larry Street, pretty much where the existing sidewalk terminates before you get to the railroad tracks. Costs, we touched on it briefly. This slide sort of represents the costs for the alternatives, and what we have here is identified as the proposed action. So currently the town has the town's agreement with DOT identifies a project budget of 1.3, what's called 1.35 million. So the lowest cost alternative to get that sidewalk in the limits that we've identified as sort of the priority area represents a project budget of 1.85 million. So the project, as shown within those project limits, is about 500,000 above the available funding. So we will have to coordinate with the town and DOT to identify whether additional funding is available. We have started that process, but we still have to formally get the engineering study approved and get that alternative approved before we can commit, or before any additional funding can be committed to the project. So sort of the next steps, we will finish the engineering study, and all of that information, all of our alternatives, our reporting, our survey, everything gets submitted to DOT to review prior to getting authorization to move forward with formal design and permitting. At that point, when we submit those documents to DOT, we'll be able to review whether additional funding opportunities are available with DOT. I would expect at this point, if there are, it would be the same 80-20 split as currently under the agreement, so 80% federal, 20% local match. And then following the review and approval of our engineering study, we would proceed with design, full-on design and permitting that meets the federal process. We have we have shoreline permitting. We're going to have various environmental permits that we'll have to get as part of the project. And right now, sort of the general schedule is anticipated design to be completed in 26 for 27 construction. That's all that I have. That was a lot. I don't know if there are any questions.
I got one that's, I don't know if we're supposed to talk about this right now, because you said nothing about easements.
Yep.
You've spoken about, but when you guys engineered or when you sent folks out to the property, some of us, you're looking at where those sticks were 15 feet. Or if I have 200 feet of frontage and you're showing 15 feet, is that what could be taken away?
No, so those, and I wish my surveyor was here to answer that question, but so those were stakes that were developed from the original subdivision plans through that area. If you look at what we have determined to be the right of way, I'll get to the plan, but it's generally where the utility poles are as a guide as to where the right of way is. We went back and forth, and I know we had some discussions about, we had placed those stakes, what do these stakes mean? And but no, so those were stakes that were placed from a formal subdivision plan, and then we take all of the historical records, we go back and identify, what's the best fit right away. And for visual purposes, generally the utility poles. You know, it might be a little bit in, it might be a little bit out, but that's, you know, that's probably a good guide to kind of look through there. But when we go through the easement process, we'll have meetings with every affected property owner. You know, we have to follow the federal process, which means there's a whole regulated process before, you know, before we can get an easement from somebody, who, you know, from a location that we would look at getting an easement. But yeah, those stakes, they were surprising.
Can they be removed?
What's that?
Can people take those stakes out of their yards now, or
Yeah,
something purpose?
let me just confirm. I'm pretty sure we can take them out. I'm pretty sure we can take them out now. I mean, we're done the survey. So, I mean, you probably want to start cutting your grass, right? You want to take these things out, so.
Remove them and then put them back.
Yeah, I would say at this point, you could probably take them down.
Can they keep them? It's garbage.
Yeah.
Those are some nice stakes.
You can keep them and take the ribbons and, you know, but yeah, at this point, we're done the survey. I would say if those stakes are in your way, feel free to take them out. You know, we're doing survey on the other Main Street project, and you know, we could take them out. I can have them take them out too. So.
Eric will tell you, I'm not a big fan of right-of-ways and the 5 foot. And he's totally correct. It is the preferable way to go to build new sidewalks is a 5 foot sidewalk. And who doesn't like a 5 foot sidewalk? Except unless you had, and he highlighted some areas, if you're talking about moving retaining walls, and now all of a sudden the project is going to become very expensive for that extra foot is going to cost you $100,000. Then all of a sudden we can't do the project and the sidewalk becomes a 100-yard sidewalk, right? So when we had our final analysis conversations, when we looked at it, there really isn't any substantial right-of-way issues. Nobody's going to be seeing, you know, a utility pole that has to move or a retaining wall that's going to have to get rebuilt, moved, or anything of significant impact.
Yeah, so for the most part, generally where the existing sidewalk is, it's pretty much gonna be in the same spot. You know, give or take a couple inches here or there, just to make everything nice and square and you know, make the alignment for the curb look great. But for the most part, I would say the existing sidewalk, if you look at the old one, you measure it over another 6-8 inches, that might be approximately the backside of the sidewalk. But no, I don't think there's really too much shifting of sidewalk, you know, in either direction.
So my house is the one with the culvert, the walk circle in it, so
Yep.
what's the plan?
All right, so,
You don't have a picture of it there.
no, I have it over there, so.
It's not pretty good.
Is there actual? Oh, I got the actual rock structure, yeah. Almost fell in there.
Because that parking lot drains across the street, so we have to figure something out.
Yeah, so I have a plan of it over there, but I'll just kind of pull the picture up. So what we're looking to do, I think what we have drafted in right now is removal of sort of the hole and putting a nice structure there with a beehive grate that can be mowed around. And our current plan shows replacing the culvert that crosses the street because there's a sinkhole in front of it.
Yeah, so yeah, my house is decided with the one with like sinkhole on it.
Yeah, let me just get to it. I think it's right there. So there you can see there's sort of a sinkhole in the road.
Yeah, 'cause it's not 4 feet from the edge of the pavement there.
No, it kind of right there. So we would be looking at sort of moving, moving that stone dry well and putting a formal structure in there to fill that in with a beehive grate. That's kind of what we have drafted up right now, and then replacing the culvert across the street.
Replace the whole thing.
What's that?
You gotta replace the whole culvert.
That's what I have. Everything, like I said, in our study, everything has to go to DOT to get reviewed and approved. But yeah, I mean,
It's just a piece of metal slid into concrete. We did it like 40 or 50 years ago.
yeah, so we would be looking at putting a new concrete, because there's not a ton of cover there, so, looking at a new concrete pipe that goes across the road.
I think there's a couple more you're gonna find the same.
Yeah, that's like preliminary design, really, we're gonna start getting into that. But, we'll have to coordinate with you folks on that.
Because then the pole that's right next to that too is only like 2 feet off the road too.
Yeah, we got some challenges going through that area, and I got, we can look at it after I got it on the plan, just kind of what we have drafted up.
You adding any drainage down beside the,
Yeah, we have a couple of spots where, we're adding some drainage. We're not adding a lot of drainage because there's not a lot out there. We have a couple of spots where we're putting some catch basins to tie into the existing. I think it's at, High Street. There's a section where there's existing drainage that goes out by Evan Street. But yeah, we have a couple, but not a huge
pretty
drainage
much
project.
started with anything from High Street almost down to the pipe there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which street has.
There's one abandoned one that goes between myself and 88.
Yeah,
Hoping not to
yeah, Jake told me that he talked to him about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but, not a ton of drainage improvements, but we do have a couple spots where, we think it's a good idea to put some drainage. Yep,
When you say drainage, can you explain a little bit more what that means? And is it like the great drainages that are there now? And how much that would move on to a property where that might have to be placed and what it kind of looks like?
so we would be looking at drainage on the road side of the sidewalk, where you would see like the grate, and trying to work with some of the drainage that's already out there. We have a couple of spots where there is existing drainage. Like I said, I think it's either High Street or Blunden Street. There's one that goes out back towards Evan Street. I think there's an opportunity for a catch basin there to tie into that. But for the most part, it would be limited to drainage on the road side of the curb where we can collect some water, to try to alleviate, some of the drainage concerns, especially where we don't have curb now. We have, now we're gonna have a barrier, right? We're gonna have a small river that's gonna run along the curb. We're gonna have to deal with that, as part of this project.
And the second question is, the 4-foot wide sidewalks compared to the 5-foot wide sidewalks, as far as the money goes, the federal money, would there be enough federal money to complete the whole project with the 4-foot wide versus the 5-foot wide?
No, once you start looking at the additional, it's the additional width of 1 foot of pavement and gravel, cutting it down to 4 feet, it didn't really make that much. When we're talking about, $1.8 million, it was probably like $50,000, $75,000. So in the grand scheme of things, at an 80% funded project, I think we believe that we would try to get, 5-foot wide sidewalks through there because it's, it wouldn't really allow us to go from point A to point B, narrowing it down to 4 feet.
So we looked at that, and again, that's my kind of modus operandi. I would like to keep this under budget. That 4 foot doesn't save as much. We talked about that. Now, again, if there were difficult rights of way and you had to be moving utilities and rebuilding retaining walls, and now there's a $200,000 difference, then we'd be having 4-foot sidewalks. But because it's said it's a minimal, and there's a likelihood that DOT would say, so why aren't you building the recommended ADA accessible sidewalks? And you're choosing to use bump outs, which some people don't like anyway. DOT might have just said, like,
Just go by.
just go fine.
Yeah, we didn't have a ton of hurdles, in terms of alignment and width constraints through here. Because the back of the sidewalk isn't right on the right of way, there's a little bit of, wiggle room there that we can, either move the curb a little closer to the road because some of that shoulder is really wide, to make that consistent. But, getting that 5-foot wide sidewalk in there wasn't, there weren't really any additional space needs to get that extra foot in there.
And so assuming that the extra wide is on the road side, if that's not something that the state of South can take.
Pardon?
The extra wide that's on the road side, that's not something the state will stop you from using for sidewalk if you want to.
No, so we have, for the most part, all of the sidewalk is in the right of way. We do have some areas where there may be some grading, like I mentioned, just to make sure things drain. But some areas, the sidewalk gets a little bit closer to the center of the road to try to keep a consistent shoulder through there. And then some areas we're using a little bit of the available right of way on the back side of the sidewalk to get that 5 feet in there. But, 95% of this project, the sidewalk is in the right of way. Yep.
Eric, am I right then to understand that if we go with a 5-foot wide sidewalk, we don't need to have bump outs to meet ADA?
Correct.
So it would be a straight shot?
Correct.
Okay, so it seems to me, during winter, wouldn't that be a little bit easier to plow?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, when you have the funding up there,
Yep.
and we've shown the 500,000 excess.
Yep.
So 1.85 million, 20% for the town is 370,000. So if there was no extra money, we're looking at 870,000 for the town's portion. Does that math work?
So what, we're looking basically at about 500,000, so our max exposure would be 100,000
Oh, so it'd be 20% of the five.
extra.
So it'd be 100,000 on the 500, but still 370 on the 1.8.
Yeah. Yeah.
So under 500,000 for the whole town's portion.
Yes, oh yes.
Yeah.
On that.
Yeah, and I don't, there's no pressure and don't hold me on this. Are we being recorded? Yeah, I guess we are, yeah.
Yeah.
HEB does a really good job, in my experience, of setting conservative levels. And unless we find an archaeological dig site or somebody hits a water main, we should be coming in under budget. So I'm hoping that we're not looking at finding an extra $100,000.
So if it could be done at 1.8, it's still 307, that's 370
Yes.
for the town.
Yes,
And then 20% of anything above that, assuming 80-20 funding can be done. But if 80-20 funding cannot be found, then it would be 870 in the town.
If the town could choose,
no,
the town could choose to pick
Assuming
it up.
that
Yeah.
that's what everybody decided, the town could be.
Yeah, the town, if that's, if that's the goal of the project, the town could choose, yeah, we're gonna hit us.
we probably won't.
Right.
Look, I understand that, I understand that. It's just-
But the good news is New Hampshire
Putting the numbers
DOT,
in perspective.
New Hampshire DOT for this particular TAP project, and not to get into the weeds, they understand escalating, inflation rates, and they have money available to cover some of these not unexpected increases. So I anticipate, I'll put it this way, I'll be surprised if DOT doesn't have more money available, because they like this project. It's a needed project. Am I wrong, Aaron? Okay.
No, I think, that as long as the increases meet the purpose and need statement, and money is available, generally, as long as they approve those funds, it would be an 80-20 split.
Are those funds that the state already has in hand?
Pardon?
Are those funds that the state already has in hand?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a complicated process, but they have projects that get sort of delayed, they have projects that get bumped up, so they, have I don't want to say not a bucket of money, but they have, places where, if they don't have a project that's supposed to go this year, it gets, moved to another calendar year, sometimes, some funds free up, but, we would have to, formally submit our engineering study and say, this is our lowest cost alternative, and then they would have to take it back to their administrators and say, hey, look, Town of Gorham is looking to do 1.85 million, do we have funding available to do that? So that would be a process that they would do at the state level. Yep.
How long do you expect the sidewalk to last? Because once sidewalks start to buckle, people start to walk in the street and not on the sidewalk.
Yeah, so we're looking at a 5-foot wide paved sidewalk with granite curb. So similar to what I guess you have sections on Main Street where you have sort of the granite, the strong granite curb along the roadway, and then a 5-foot wide sidewalk on the backside. You know, I don't like to project time, you know, how long the sidewalk will last. It kind of depends on maintenance. It depends on, you know, a lot of those things. But, you know, the goal is to put in place durable materials that, you know, will last substantial time.
So what kind of maintenance would be required?
So, you know, making sure it's plowed, like when you have concrete sidewalks, if you dump a bunch of salt on it and you don't seal that sidewalk all the time, sometimes that salt can start eating away at the concrete. Maintenance would be like, let's say a crack develops, seal the crack, you know, come crack seal it, make sure water doesn't intrude into those cracks, start heaving the sidewalk, you know, the basic maintenance items.
I'm gonna assume you're ripping out the old concrete underneath the 3 to 5 inch asphalt.
On the sidewalk?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're proposing like an 18-inch section.
Yeah.
So, you know, a general piece of curb is like 18 inches deep. So you're taking, you know, 18 inches of material out, putting in good gravel, you know, setting that curb in concrete. So when it hits the plow, it doesn't tip over. You know, so all of those sort of design elements are included in that overall sort of cost. So we want to make sure that what we put in there is not just a Band-Aid.
I ask a few words. I'm Howard Retired, for those of you who don't know me, I'm chairman of the Gorham Planning Board, and I'm also chairman of the Board of Directors of the North Country Council Regional Planning Committee, and I have served the town of Gorham as representative of the New Hampshire Department of Transportation Advisory Committee. For so long, we don't know when I started. But, so this is a project we started talking about way back in the late 80s and early 90s, and for us to get through. In the discussions we've had with the NGDOT in the last couple of years when this got brought up, I'm going to tell you this right now because I was absolutely stunned at the amount of support that we got for this project from the surrounding communities that are in it, okay, when this came through. I like what the alternatives are. I personally think we need to go with the 5-foot sidewalk, and I'll tell you why. Because I think if we're gonna do this, let's do it right, let's do it once and for all. And that's what I'm hoping to do. The also thing that I'm supporting the 5-foot sidewalk is because I think the bump outs become hazardous when it comes to winter plow. I don't know how many of you ever had to do winter plowing, I have, it's not fun. So that's one of the reasons that we support this. But I'm also going to tell you the truth, is that when these projects come up, and we have to get them through, we have to get support from the other local communities and the regional planning commission. I have to get approval from DOT, local DOT. We have to get them from all of these people. In order to get that kind of approval and that kind of support for a project like this, I'll tell you, when I got it, I was absolutely stunned at the support. I didn't think that we would get that kind of support from the surrounding communities. So I'm saying that right now, I think we should proceed as fast as we can and grab this money as fast as we can to complete this project. Because I'm telling you right now, with the things that I'm hearing, and the things I'm going through, especially with the DOT, transportation committee meetings, we're not seeing a clear picture. We don't have enough men to do the work. We don't have enough men in DOT to just maintain what we have. Maintenance projects are falling behind, construction projects are falling behind, and 10-year projects on a 10-year plan are going to end up being on the 20-year plan. And this is what we're going to be facing. And I'm telling you right now, and I'm going to be honest with you, I have an extra DOT transportation meeting tomorrow. And I'm going to go to that. And I will try to represent the town as best as I can. But if I brought this up tomorrow, I can tell you right now, the only support I would get would be from the towns of Shelburne and Randolph.
and that's it. I wouldn't get the support I got from Colbrook or Lancaster, or Littleton or Lancaster that I did with this, get brought up there. So I'm thinking, and I hope you all agree with me, I think HEB has done a pretty good job of going through all of this, give us all the things that we need to do. And I think the town has done excellent work on trying to put this all together. So I'm saying, we got the opportunity right now, let's grab it and let's do it. And I hope you all support everyone who's trying to get this project. Thanks. Thank you, Paul.
Any more questions?
Does the town intend to use the sidewalk as a snowmobile trail in the winter?
That is not this sidewalk.
No, no, I mean, and these are pedestrian sidewalks. The town, I don't think historically, of course, other people could talk to that has not historically been a snowmobile route, as far as I know. And that's not the intention.
Snowmobiles will be end on that section of the sidewalk right from the beginning.
Really? No, that's not, it's not a snowmobile. It's not a multi-use trail. I mean, there are grants out there. There's money for multi-use trails, which, you know, are multi-use trails. This is not, we didn't go after a pedestrian improvement grant to have a snowmobile trail.
This is pedestrian, non-motorized, under the TAP program, Transportation Alternatives.
No?
Is that it?
Yeah, do you want to call it?
Why not? So we'll call this, public hearing to a close. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all very much. There's plans up here if you like plans.
Yeah, I do have some plans if anybody wants to see them.
All right, they're on different sheets. Second by Bob, all in favor? You on this one? All right. No.
No, I think you're on the next one.